Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How are you today, Nick?
Hey, doing well. Yourself?
Very well, very hot, but I'm very, very excited that we have our third guest, and it is Dr. Christina Sapienza, who's the assistant principal in the Comac Middle School. It's a school district here out on Long Island. So welcome, Christina, to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to be here. We had a little some technical things behind the scenes, but we're up and running and ready to go. So I had the good fortune of beating Christina as part of a middle school assistant principal, I guess a mini consortium, if you will. And she did a wonderful presentation, it was probably about a year ago now, on gender bias. And I thought it would be an incredible topic to cover for one of our shows. And we were very fortunate to have Christina. This is one of her passions, talking about the gender bias problem. And I definitely want to get into that topic. And she's really well informed on the topic, and I think has a tremendous amount to offer to us and to all of our listeners. So, Christina, what drew you to the topic of gender bias?
Sure. Well, first, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about it, because for me, especially when I think about education, this is one of those things that we can really help conquer and change just by being aware of it. It's not something that we need to run out and buy a program or adopt standards and roll them out in some kind of difficult manner. It's really something that I think just the awareness starts the change that I think is important to see. So, when you ask what got me passionate about it, I must say I think it's been something that has always been, I've always been passionate about. I am the only girl in a family of all boys, and I've always noticed from a very young age that I was treated a little bit differently, and I have this desire for justice. And I was always annoyed. Why did the boys get to go out and play and I had to help my mom clean up, and they'd be playing a great game of football outside and I'd have to join late, and so I was always interested in why I was treated differently. And then that started for me to look even outside my own home. I noticed on television, again at a very young age, cleaning products. There's always a woman doing the laundry and doing the dishes. Even something as silly, you can imagine I drove my brothers crazy. But even something as simple as frozen vegetables, if you turn the package over, it was like the woman had painted nails, So at a very young age, I was really aware that there was a message to how women were viewed, both, inside the home and out. So I think that it's been an intrinsic passion for me. As I've gotten older and now entered the workforce, I was fortunate enough to read a book that really reignited my passion, which was Lean In. And as I started looking at the statistics about how women don't really...
That's the Sheryl Sandberg book?
Correct, the Sheryl Sandberg book. How women really don't rise to the level of leadership in the way that men do. But staggering statistics, and if you don't mind me just sharing a few of them with you.
Please.
And please jump in at any time, because I can go on and on about this. But
So I'm just really enjoying listening right now.
Okay, good. So jump in anytime. But basically only 21 out of Fortune 500 companies are run by women. Only 14% hold executive seats. 18% of our elected officials are made up of women. And I started to really wonder why. Especially when you think about the statistics we see in schools, where girls really outperform boys almost across the board. Women are starting now to hold more of the bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. And you'll see sometimes boys struggle a bit more in school. Comprising of 30% of them are likely to drop out, 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, and 2/3 of our special ed population are comprised of boys. So it was just, there were two really opposite ends of the spectrums that were interesting to me. So I started.
So
to,
let me
Sure.
interject for a second there. So you gave us a lot of good stuff. So I'd like to go back to when you were kind of growing up. So you came across this, or you recognized at an early age, it's gender bias. And how early are we talking about? Were you very little?
I was, as long as I can remember, I was, I grew up in a very traditional home. My father works, my mother stayed home. And, there were just a lot of expectations of, my mother's job was the home and the kids. And for whatever reason, I sort of got grouped in with that.
Hmm.
So anything that my mother was kind of taking care of, it was expected that I was going to help her. I almost feel like
So when you
like a housewife, mother, woman in training was sort of how I felt.
Interesting. So when you detected this or you picked up on this, did you bring it up to your mother? And if so, how did she respond to that?
Actually, and I feel very fortunate. I really would spar with my father a lot. I was very lucky to have a father who found that to be interesting, funny, and I really probably credit a lot of why I am in the position I am today because he allowed me to question it, and probably got so tired of hearing me that eventually the boys had to help clean up. And eventually, and again, not because I think he was agreeing with me. I think he was tired of hearing me. But he allowed me to have those opinions at home. So, I really credit him a lot for continuing to feel like I can have an opinion and have my voice be heard. Had my father not done that, I might not have followed the path I did today. So,
Interesting. Now, and I'm certainly not going to go into. I'm smart enough to know not to ask a woman's age, but certainly from seeing you and having met you, we're not talking about your childhood being during the suffrage era of the turn of
correct.
the 20th century. So we were talking about relatively modern modern day. So
Absolutely. And
in
you know what?
your in your yeah.
I'm not shy. I'm 36, so I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And so yeah, it certainly was not that long ago. And I would like I certainly would never speak for all women, but certainly a lot of the women I know in my life grew up in similar
Mhm.
homes, where our mothers were home and did not have careers, or if they did, they put them on hold to be at home. So, a lot of people I know grew up similarly in that respect. Um,
So let's talk about society because you had mentioned that, and then I want to obviously tie this into schooling and what we
sure.
could do.
Hmm.
So I know that you've paid particular attention to how society presents gender bias, in media, in the internet, through the political world. So, to what extent do you feel it really is embedded into society, and to what extent is it perhaps not?
Sure. Well, I think that, part of this journey for me was, obviously the gender bias I felt like I experienced at a young age. But then also now I'm lucky enough to have three young children of my own. And interestingly enough, I have one girl with two boys. So now
Hmm.
I'm charged with this awesome task, which really started me paying a lot more attention to the messages in the media. The things, my kids are young, they haven't really entered school yet. So for me, it was what they were surrounding themselves with. So initially, this really became how am I going to raise my daughter to feel like she has every option available to her and that there aren't pathways for boys and there aren't pathways for girls. So it started for me at home and in the media. And then I realized it just kind of dawned on me, if I can almost say one day, right now I'm looking at this so small. I'm looking at it of these three people that I brought into the world, but really,
Hmm.
I'm fortunate enough every single day. I work with a building of 1,700 students, and I felt like this matters not just only to my three at home, but this is a
Hmm.
bigger issue society-wise. Why am I only focusing on my daughter when I'm working with 900 daughters? Which really then started to shape my lens about looking into our school systems and what we do and how we teach people to combat the things that they're seeing, mostly, like I said, in the media and the messages our kids are receiving.
Nick, do you want to jump in on?
Yeah, well, there's so many different questions I have. I'm so interested. Well, one of the things I've always talked about is the daycare issue.
Mhm.
And for you to talk about, you're 36, you have a PhD, you're well on your way to a tremendous, career, and you have three young children. And I just look at the women that I've worked with, the mothers, and I just feel as if they have like the double task of trying to hold down everything at home
Mhm.
and engage in a career which they're totally entitled to. As you pointed out, the more qualified young people out of college are the women
Hmm.
right
Right,
now.
right.
I've always thought about, why this country and even just specifically schools, how great would it be? I guess I should ask you, if we had like a daycare center in the school
Right.
setting where parents could drop their kids off. Some of my students have brought this up. They feel as if it would be a great opportunity for some of the older kids to actually work in a childcare setting, get real experience, and you wouldn't have those female teachers that are racing out of the parking lot, not because they don't want to be
course.
there, because they have to get
Right.
home.
Right.
And, if I can even take it to a bigger issue, it really comes down to the underrepresentation that women have on a much larger scale, which is in all the laws of our country. We don't do a good job here taking care of our moms, and passing laws and passing, legislation that really helps a mother still maintain her career, which is actually a lot of what the Lean In book is about, saying that as women, it's really pretty much exactly what you said, Nick, that, as women have children, they start to lean back from their career because they have a lot of other things to take care of. And I really resonated with that. I was on a fast track. I became an administrator when I was 26 and a half. I didn't have children at the time, and my sights were different. And when I had children, I felt myself lean back a bit in my career because, you only get one chance to raise your children right.
Right.
And I realized very quickly what little support there was for me to do that, from maternity care, from being able to take that time to be with my children and create that bond, and then also feel like coming back to work with that support. And the childcare issue is very real for people. And
Not
the
to mention the expense of childcare.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole premise of the book Lean In is saying those things are not going to change until more women's voices are at the table. So in order for women to really get the support, the childcare in schools, the childcare at work, the maternity laws, it's not going to happen until women plug through, if you will, and get their voices at that table, on the legislative level. So it's an interesting conversation that, a group of men, who might be making these laws, if they're not living these realities, it's not something that's on the forefront of their minds. Although that's
So I can
changing.
only imagine that your head probably explodes every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, whether he's talking about Carly Fiorina or
Well, I have to tell you,
or
it's
Megyn Kelly. Yeah.
it's gender bias at its finest. Actually,
So
Or at its worst.
Or-
yeah, exactly. But it actually, it in a weird way, it kind of excites me because people are talking about it. As I said in the beginning of this, I think the major way to combat this is not funding state programs and putting a lot of taxpayers' money into things. It's the awareness of how people really have a different view about men and women, and what their capabilities are in the future.
So let's talk about our schools. Now, you mentioned you're in a school of 1,700. I'm in a school approximately the same size. Nick's school is slightly smaller, but not by much. So where do you find, as a school administrator, examples of gender bias in the classroom or in the school building?
Absolutely. Well, part of what I did some research on is something called the hidden curriculum. Because, when I think about gender bias, and when I certainly think about it in this school, I believe, for the most part, excluding, Donald Trump, nobody's doing it on purpose. I don't think that people go to school in the morning, teachers, parents, I don't think we say, I'm going to limit my daughter's possibilities of, what she can become. But I do think that we really do have a hidden curriculum and that we have some awesome opportunities to change the way our girls view each other, themselves, and, gender bias for the boys too. This be a man at all costs is certainly detrimental to our boys. So when I think about gender bias, obviously it's kind of easy to always talk about our girls and what their long-term plans are. But I also think about our boys and, how do we make them more socially and emotionally literate and help them see that they don't have to be strong and tough and heartless, if you will, to be successful. So it really kind of works both ways. And a lot of it is switching our own mental models. And again, I think it goes back to the awareness. So when you look at your hidden curriculum, and I like to talk to administrators about this because to me, this fits beautifully into your observations. This is something.
Do you want me to ask Nick to leave the room?
No.
I'm
Nick can
just
stay.
I'm teasing.
Nick
I'm
can stay.
teasing. We
But,
go back and forth on this all the time.
But, this should be a topic of conversation when, we're having those pre-observation conversations and our post-observation conversations. And for me, it revolves around really 4 areas, and it's our classroom management, the language we're using, encouraged behavior, and our materials. So again, that being cognizant of, are we always showing, I'm just going to pick a content area, in social studies, when we're showing important people in history, are we focusing mostly on men's contributions and the things that they've done, or are we showing girls some of the great things that women are doing besides like Women's History Month? That's my favorite, like Women's History Month. We have a month where we highlight Clara Burton and like a few others, but can it be more organic in our every single day?
Well, you picked the right content area because we're both social studies guys. So
Yeah, I think I got to take over from here. If you know, but I do want to. So I've been teaching for a very long time. I'm in my 22nd year as a social studies teacher, and I have taught American history in a lot of different ways. And I can tell you that must have been probably 10 or 12 years ago at this point. I had given the AP students in American history like a 1 day, front and back of a handout, women's history. We kind of went over everything, kind of like a test prep thing. And ironically, their DBQ was on, it was a women's history topic. And they came out of the test, and of course the kids are, you only spent 1 day on women, you only spent 1 day. Now, of course, I had talked about women all throughout the year, but never in its entirety, if you know what I mean. And then I decided to change. So now what I do is I really spend several weeks of doing women's history together so that the kids have a better understanding of it, in context. What would your, expertise be, or what would you say would be a better way of approaching the topic?
Right. Well, I think, for me, it has to be more organic, and it has to sort of be constant. I think that celebrating or making mention only at certain times of the year, I would like to see, and I think across curriculums, really putting that extra effort and thought into finding men and women in non-traditional roles and really making that a part of the conversation. Because when you come out of education for a moment, and I hope, and I believe it'll happen, I bet you, both the two of you might email me later, that when you watch TV later tonight or in the next coming days or see movies, I hope you're more sensitive and aware of the fact that our kids are being bombarded with different types of gender stereotypes, and not ones that I think we want our daughters or our sons to really acclimate to. So it really can't be done in isolation, in my opinion, in schools. It has to be done across the board. It has to be done in assemblies. It has to be done where, I think it's even happening. I think there's probably a lot more women administrators than there was 15 years ago. And I like to think that sends a powerful message to our girls, that they can aspire to be, leaders. But I think another piece of it, which is what I really feel passionately about, is the language.
I'm sorry. Can I just jump in? Can I just jump in there? Because when you're talking about that leadership and the role models, we live in a society in which the leading, I guess, role model, if you will, with a small r and small m, might be considered Kim Kardashian, for God's sake. So
breaks my heart.
I mean, the most popular, wealthy, famous individual going. It's not Hillary Clinton. It's not Carly Fiorina. It's not Elizabeth. Warren. Thank you very much. I just blanked out. It's not. These aren't the people that we're seeing as the even the titans of modern industry. And we're in an era now where technology, you mentioned boys will be boys and sort of the be a tough man type of mantra. That's almost faded away only because geeks and nerds are like the coolest thing going right now. I mean, it's the Steve Jobses and the Wozniaks and the Bill Gateses. They're sort of the icons now. It's not the Rocky Marcianos of the world as much anymore. But again, they're men, and so outside of Sheryl, Sandberg, we don't see in the public eye a large spate of female executives, primarily because they probably don't exist out there based on the statistic that you started with. And I think that's also problematic. So where do people wind up, or young girls wind up looking? They wind up looking to the Kardashians. They wind up looking to the housewives. It almost hurts to even say these words.
Right. No, it actually hurts to hear them. I totally agree with you. And
so what do we do? I mean, how do we in schools? How do we can't pretend that the Kardashians don't exist?
Absolutely not. And again, I think it's about having those conversations and trying to counterbalance that. when you have speakers come in, very often, police officers, firefighters, there's no harm in asking, could we have a female firefighter? Could we have a female police officer? Just again, highlighting those non-traditional roles. But obviously, those are small things that I don't think are going to combat the whole issue. Obviously, this is a society issue. So I think that having the conversations, I had the privilege of sitting in a high school, round table not that long ago. And I was sitting with, if I could just tell you how brilliantly and well-spoken a group of these high schoolers I was sitting with. And we were talking about discrimination and big society topics. And I had this young lady sit to me and say, I feel very fortunate. I've never been in a position to be discriminated against. And, she kind of went on. And, I didn't want to get into it then, but we spoke after. And I asked her just a couple of, poignant questions. And she realized that she had, based on the fact of being a woman. And I think that us as women are so not aware of that. And I have to even say, prior to having children, I would have told you I didn't feel discriminated against. And I'll tell you why. My criteria was I was successful. I had a job. I was making a lot of money, more money than the gentleman I was with at the time. And so in my mind, thank you, in my mind, as far as society was concerned, I wasn't being discriminated against. I didn't see the big picture. I didn't see it in a different context. I was looking at it purely from my own standpoint, which, is not everybody's. So in having this conversation with this young woman, and I started to point out some things in the media. One of my favorite, and I'm sure you've heard me speak about it, one of my favorite websites is cjane.org. And one of my favorite things to do is share this website and these statistics with our kids, because I think it comes down to not just showing women in roles and trying to get out of those traditional pieces. That can't do it by itself. It really has to be engaging kids in this conversation. When I talk about cjane.org, just a quick story about it, for those of you that don't know, it's Gina Davis. Gina Davis is absolutely a pioneer when it comes to women's screen time, not only in front of the screen, but behind it. And, she found when she became successful that she could really have a voice at the table when she was sitting with directors and casting producers and really help women get away from those more traditional roles you were seeing in movies. And she sat down with producers who said, she brought this up, and they were like, oh, no, that problem's been fixed. And they named off a couple of, like one or two.
Right. Sigourney Weaver fought the alien, and that's good enough, right?
Exactly. And so she realized to really have people hear her, she needed to have research and data to support it. So she created the cjane.org. I definitely encourage everybody to kind of take a look at that. And I was fascinated by it because it really starts with, we talk about, you asked me when I remembered, feeling, treated different because I was, a girl. And I said, as long as I can remember. And when I saw these statistics, it was interesting to me. So if you don't mind, I just want to share a few of them with you. And this is really talking about, forget like Kim Kardashian, but we're talking about children's family movies. So males have 75% of the speaking parts in children's entertainment. Between 2006 and 2009, not one female character in a G-rated film was in medical, science, business, or the law field. Not one. And when I thought about this, I was like, my daughter's 3, and I was like, who is she supposed to want to pretend to be? And if we think about it, a princess. And look, I love princesses. I got nothing against princesses. But that can't be her only lens. And when I looked at the statistics, I thought to myself, she doesn't have much else to look at. This is a staggering one also, that males outnumber women 3-to-1 in family films, and this is the same ratio since 1946.
That's staggering.
Yeah, and I venture to guess, think about it. What is one of our kids' favorite movies, right? Toy Story. What woman can she emulate to be? We have Buzz Lightyear and Woody who are fighting to save the day. We have Bo Peep.
Right. Little Bo Peep, right.
Who's swooning over Woody. Eventually Jessie comes into the picture, which is great, I think in the second film. But that's still only one female character. It's like they threw in their token,
right.
woman.
Don't forget Mrs. Potato Head. Yeah. She was pivotal in the first one.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
She was very well accessorized. But, so my point is our kids at a very young age are shaping that mental model. My happiness is things are starting to change slowly. Legos, now makes Legos that are more targeted to girls, which I enjoy the fact that my daughter can build and invent, but still be a girl. She doesn't have to play with the cars and the trucks and the planes, but she can still build. There's a great company called Goldie Blocks, which again is another website I really implore people to check out because it's engineering for girls. And you can buy kits and they can build race cars and pulleys and machines, but again, targeted to their interests as well. We don't want girls to stop being girls, and you don't want boys to stop being boys. They should still have their differences and their interests, but I don't think that we can only create it for them. You know what I mean? So
It's interesting that you say that. Are you familiar with the Bechdel test?
yeah, the Bechdel.
Speaking
the
of
Bechdel
movies,
test. Yes.
is it Bechdel or Bechdel? I
It's
think
the
it's
Bechdel test.
Bechdel?
Bechdel. Yep.
Tomato. I apologize to the woman if I ever meet her. But the
okay.
Bechdel test or Bechdel test basically says that there have to be three characteristics or standards. One, a movie has to have at least two women who have actual roles that have names. It can't just be woman number one or two.
Right.
They have to actually talk to each other, and when they talk to each other, they have to talk about something besides a man.
Correct.
And most movies actually fail to pass this test, which
Absolutely.
I think really speaks volumes to the point that you're trying to make, Christina.
Absolutely, and some great movies. One of them, because I actually am familiar with that, was Harry Potter. Now, on one hand, you would think, like, Harry Potter, I forget the girl's name in that. But the character...
I used to know it, I can't remember. Yeah.
Oh, it's like right on the tip of my tongue. But she obviously, she's a strong character. So it's interesting that she would fail the Bechdel test, but who did she have to talk to? What other woman was in that for her? And again, when were they talking about something other than one of the boy characters?
Right.
The thing I do have to say is, and as I had said, things are changing. One of my favorite cartoons in the world right now is Doc McStuffins. And it's a child show on Disney Junior, and what I love about
Do you wait for your daughter to go to sleep and then you watch it, or do you watch it with her? Be honest.
I've been known to watch it by myself.
Okay, thank you for your honesty.
I gotta be honest. I have to see how it ends, But what's very cool about Doc McStuffins is, first of all, it's a family home. The mother in Doc McStuffins is a pediatrician. The father is actually the stay-at-home dad who takes care of the family, and they make this very apparent in the show. And the daughter, which is Doc, emulates her mother, and she acts as a doctor to all her toys. So with Doc McStuffins, obviously came a lot of toys that are all doctor-related, that are targeted towards our girls. And what was very cool, maybe one of my favorite episodes that I watched by myself, is Gina Davis is in an episode of Doc McStuffins.
Okay, there you go.
And she, in that episode, the princess, saves the night. And it was just very exciting. It was very exciting to really take a show that was already trying to change those traditional roles and have Gina Davis infuse herself in that way of that it's not always the knight saving the princess,
Right, or the damsel in distress concept.
Exactly. And, I recommend for research purposes that you guys YouTube that and watch it. Because it really was a very cool episode. And, when you want to bring that back to schools, you can find a short clip of that. It was probably like 25 seconds to 30 seconds that really capitalizes on that. Infuse that into a conversation, whether it's in a sociology class, in an ELA class. It can fit anywhere. You can make it fit anywhere. Just even having a debate about these statistics. Because I venture to guess, anytime I engage people in conversations about this, there's a lot of strong feelings and a lot of debate back and forth. And that's really what I would like to see happen in schools is let's talk about it.
Plus, everybody brings their personal experience to the table, just like you did, just like I did. We all grew up in some form of a household with, some presence of, either a maternal or a paternal figure, or both, if we were fortunate, and that. So we bring that with us, and let's be honest, we bring some of those biases with us from our own personal experiences. But I know that you spoke last year about the use of language and how language sort of captures the gender bias as well. Can you give us an example of that?
Absolutely. And that's something even I like to think, obviously, as you've probably heard me speak, I'm very sensitive to this topic. And I've still found myself using language, again, mostly with my children, that further perpetuates How many times have both my kids acted inappropriate, right? Or they're telling me what to do. I have, to this day, never even thought to call my son bossy, but I have called my daughter bossy. And I thought to myself in that moment, when it happened, I was like, stop, she was telling me what to do. And I said, stop being so bossy. And then I thought to myself, let me pause here for a minute. What is she doing? She's young. She's asserting herself. She's telling me what she wants. She's telling me what she needs. Aren't those leadership qualities? So by me telling her to not be bossy, let me finish. Wait. The comment isn't don't be bossy. It's how do we talk to people? Because I don't want her to stop telling people how she feels and assert herself, but I want her to treat people respectfully. So it's not about, it wasn't that she was being bossy, it was that she wasn't talking nice to me.
Christina, did you ever see, I'm sorry, but did you ever see I don't know if it's a commercial or just a YouTube video, but I think it's called A Man's a Boss, A Woman's Bossy. I think it's Pantene. I'm sorry, I'm showing my ignorance here. I don't know if it's a hair product or makeup.
Right.
Is Pantene a company?
Pantene is a hair company.
Is that a thing? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I will give credit because one of my students shared it with us last year, and it was very it was tough to watch, but it was so insightful about everything you're saying.
And
it's almost like you produced. It's like you produced the video. It's that good.
I planted that student in your class. No, and really though, that's what again started me thinking. The idea of why are girls more successful in school? Why do girls get statistically, and again, I can probably only speak to my own school, but they're not the holder of the multiple school referrals. And I think about what makes a good leader. And being compliant does not make a good leader. It makes a good student. It makes our teachers happy. It makes administrators happy and parents happy because they're doing what we say. But is that what really leads to change and leadership down the road? I want my daughter to never stop asserting herself, and particularly when she disagrees. But I have to teach her to do it respectfully. Certainly I don't want her to be disrespectful. But I think that we can we could teach them to do it respectfully without saying, don't be bossy. Because when I say don't be bossy, I'm really saying, stop telling me what to do. Stop asserting yourself. And I don't want her to do that.
That's an incredible point that you're making in terms of how the women or your young women are outperforming the young men in schools now. And I think the modern school model is definitely better geared towards women, and they do perform better in the setting that we have. And for we could probably do a whole podcast just on that alone and why that is. But when your statistics at the beginning really confirm that by and large, the people who are outperforming and doing much better in the school setting are women, are young women. They're not getting in trouble, quote unquote. They're not getting suspended or referred nearly as much as the males. And but yet, when they leave the school setting, you look at pay equality, it doesn't exist. And you look at political equality, and it doesn't exist in true numbers. And yet women make up half the population. So there's definitely a gap, between what's going on in the schools where women are doing very, very well, head and shoulders, which, by the way, Nick, is also another hair product, above men. But when they get to the workplace, it seems that the biases that are sort of inherent in our society really come to the forefront, and that's showing up in who's getting the top executive jobs. It's showing up in compensation and in a host of other places.
Sure. Which
Marc.
No,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. Oh, Marc. It reminds me. Because I do think, in terms of academics and what we do in school, I'd like to give us credit because we have shown progress. I mean, have you ever? There's that cutaway on the Family Guy where they go to a colonial schoolhouse and the girl stands up and she recites the quadratic equation. And the teacher says, "Oh, look, a girl that knows the quadratic equation. You know what that means? A witch." And we all start throwing rocks at her. But I remember a time when our teachers would absolutely say things like, "Oh, girls just aren't good at math." And that is so out of our lexicon right now. I don't think we don't even consider that anymore. So I think I don't know if you agree, I think we have done a nice job of at least encouraging girls that there's no reason why they can't strive for the same academic success as boys. And I think girls have just run with it.
I would agree with wholeheartedly that we have made tremendous strides in school in terms of the girls aren't
Right.
good at math stereotype, but I think that it lives on in people's homes, and that stereotype is very much kind of promoted, whether intentionally or unintentionally, at home.
And I think
Because people have a natural aversion to math anyway. So very often when women become moms and they feel that they can't help, especially with the new Common Core, which nobody understands, is like from outer space, but they feel like they can't provide the adequate help that they would love to provide for their child, they fall back on I was never good at math anyway. And when that comes from mom, that reinforces the stereotype, which I wanted to, I know Christina wants to jump in, but I definitely want to connect this to something called stereotype threat. But Christina, I know you wanted to respond to that.
No, I was just going to say that I absolutely agree with you. I think that progress has been made, but I think that we still, certainly have a long way to go. Something I had just done at the end of last year is we run an enrichment class, STEM, that I'm sure many people are running. And just for informational sake, I ran the numbers of that class. And we had about 120 students in this one particular section I was looking at. And if I had to tell you that there were only 10 girls who were enrolled in that class. Now, this was self-selection. The students chose if they wanted to take that class. And I thought to myself, it can't be that only 10 girls are interested. It has to be a little bit bigger than that. And I brought the question to my cabinet, what are we doing to market this towards girls? What are we doing to help encourage them to say, you can do this. This is something that could be interesting to you. And it really started a great conversation between us of how we're really marketing, not just that class, but all classes. Because on the flip side, I could show you a Creative Connections course that it was the opposite. We had over 100 girls and maybe 15 or 20 boys. So really, I think looking at our class compositions is a great place to also decide where our efforts need to continue.
There's a professor from NYU. I happened to have the good fortune of seeing him do a presentation maybe a couple of years ago now, named Professor Josh Aronson. And he has done a tremendous amount of research, and I'll put some links up on the show notes, in addition to, of course, Dr. Sapienza's work as well. But on something he calls stereotype threat. And he's basically talking about, we could argue that gender bias is no good and obviously needs to be changed, but he actually is breaking it down scientifically and mathematically to talk about exactly what kind of threat it does pose to whoever is on the receiving end of the bias or the stereotype. So I was just rereading some of his work before we recorded today, and one of the little experiments that they conducted was involving a calculus class, and they had two groups, obviously the control group and the group that they were testing, and they basically, with one group, told the students that in the results of this test over historically have demonstrated that boys outperform girls on this test because it's calculus, and sort of just let the implied stereotype work its way in. And then with the other group, they didn't tell them that there was any type of gender distinction in the results of this test. And then they gave the test to the two groups, and these were comparable students across the board, male and female. And the females in the control group, where they were told nothing about the test, outperformed the males significantly. And in the group where they told the females that this test traditionally has demonstrated some bias, they did poorly, and the males only slightly outperformed them. He also gave another example where, in taking the AP test, and I actually shared this with the AP students last year before they took the test, just identifying yourself and filling out the bubble, identifying your gender prior to the start of the test, those students, those girls, actually underperformed compared to girls who actually filled out that bubble at the end of the test. It's almost as if by bubbling in that little F, it triggered off a reminder, oh, wait a second, I'm a girl, girls don't do well at math. Right. And they sort of subconsciously bring that stereotype or that bias in with them. So I just thought it was fascinating research, and I shared that with the classes, and I showed them the statistics, and their jaws dropped a little bit.
Right. No, it's really interesting, and just even in general, there's always this constant reminder of if you're a boy, if you're a girl. I'm even, as you were speaking, I'm thinking, I wonder why that's even important to ask on an AP test. I mean, I guess they want to
That's a great
disaggregate the
question.
data, but why? Why? Why is that even important to know?
Well, I think didn't Harvard just become the first school to put a third option on the application? I think gender neutral or gender fluid.
Oh, that's
I didn't hear
interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'll send you the article. But I think that, and that's obviously a discussion for another time. But I think as we're moving to a greater disparity of the discussion on gender, maybe that might even help females to deal with some of the obstacles that you've been bringing up today.
Nick's always keeping up on what's going on in Harvard, Christina. Just so you know,
Oh, okay.
I read the New York Post.
Please. No, I'm a Harvard reject. I want everybody to know
So
that.
that's why you know so much about Kim Kardashian and the Housewives.
That's right. I could do a whole podcast on them. But no, so I think that was a really insightful look into gender bias, and I really thank you, Christina, for sharing all of your insight. I would like to transition now into the second segment of our show, which is the Methods Lab, and there was an article that was in the Times just a couple of weeks ago on teacher training, and the title of the column was "Teachers Aren't Dumb," and it was written by Daniel Willingham, and he basically is talking about the training of teachers and how he describes it as such a poor quality of preparation for teachers who are going to be in our classrooms, and he cites some specific examples in terms of not only a mediocre preparation in terms of mathematics, but he also talks about teachers of reading who don't necessarily understand various literacy concepts, and not only can they not identify them, but they couldn't necessarily effectively teach those concepts since they don't clearly have an understanding of them to students of varying ages from K to 12. So I just want to get your thoughts on, both of you, get your thoughts on this article or this column, and just to see what, you see young teachers and student teachers coming into your buildings, and what is your assessment of their level of preparation?
It's really interesting. I find, especially I really oversee special education and a little bit of our literacy. And I certainly see a learning curve that still, takes place about the actual practice of teaching in the classroom. I find that the first year, even some of our greatest new hires need a tremendous amount of mentor support. But I kind of am trying to think back and forth. Part of it is also just acclimating to the culture of your school. All schools they could look very different. The composition of the children, the needs. So, it's hard to say if it's just the learning curve of a new teacher or are they really ill prepared.
My concern, and I do feel a little bit outnumbered here with the two administrators on the show, but my concern
We'll talk slowly.
is, thank you. If society doesn't value the profession, I think we will have a very difficult time getting the most highly qualified young people to go into the job, and we're just so under attack right now. So I do think a lot of our teachers are not prepared, and I'm not sure if we're getting the highest quality people. And I don't want to digress too much, Mark, but I think we're going to see the same thing with the medical profession. I mean, doctors are under intense scrutiny. Their jobs have become and our brightest people are not going into medicine either. So I think as a country, we have to start to realize that if we don't value these very important professions, I don't know if the smartest people are going to go into it.
You bring up a really good point that I hadn't really thought about, and that's really, at this day and age, a student's 18 years old, and they're thinking about becoming an educator for all of the most amazing reasons we all did. And then they think to themselves, but why? Why would I do that at this point? With all that they're reading in the papers and these APPR scores and just all of these unfair, unbalanced, policies that seem to be made up on the spot. Every time you open a new update, it's another, extension. I could really see why people might make a different decision.
You know, Christina, I think about that all the time because I was somebody that never even gave thought to doing anything in my life other than teaching. That, and that's, you know, as early as you knew about gender bias, that's as early as I knew. It's just I just felt that that's who, and I unfortunately I ask myself and I wonder if I were in high school right now, and I don't know the
Hmm.
answer, would I still go into teaching or would I be so turned off? But you know, you wonder how in tuned are
Hmm.
they to these
Right.
issues.
Right. And it's funny,
So,
whenever I talk to students about education, and most of them become educators because of an emotional connection or a respect for somebody who really influenced their lives, talk about the importance of what our teachers do every single day. And I don't know, it's interesting to know if what they're reading in the paper, if they are connected to that, would be enough to deter, their love of going forward. Um, so
right.
it's definitely an interesting thought, and I do think about as far as the colleges and the way they're preparing teachers. I can only speak from my own experience. Obviously, it was a long time ago, but I did not feel completely prepared. My first year of teaching, I learned a tremendous amount, and I credit my colleagues, and the administrators that I worked with. I don't think that I was. I'll never forget my first period of resource room. I was like, I'm supposed to do what? I really, I know that in my own personal experience, my education program, as much as I enjoyed it, I don't think that I felt fully prepared. And it was those colleagues. And I see that here today in my school. The mentors and the support from the departments is really what gets those teachers from good to great.
Well, one of the arguments that the author was making in the piece was that there's too much talk of theory
Mm.
in the preparation level in the college or the master's degree preparation, and not enough practical nuts and bolts experience talk or nuts and bolts experience period. And the truth of the matter is, when you get into the classroom, a lot of times, theory will only get you so far, and then you really have to have a whole lot of other skills or tools in the toolbox in order to make a lesson really work and to connect with kids. And that is the thing that theory can never really fully, teach you. And certainly we know, and one of the nice things about teaching is that every day is different. And that's why I have some friends who are in the private sector, and they're accountants or actuaries, and they're working with tables and so on. And I think I would, find the highest floor and open up the window and say goodbye to everybody. I don't think I would be able to manage that, because I love the faster pace and how things are so different. Sometimes I don't love how different they are,
Right.
but on a given day, but by and large, you have to have that kind of flexibility, and that's just not theoretical. You have to have that practical ability.
Sure.
Well, I think the problem there is the people running the college programs that they're just not in tune to the changes that have taken place with young people.
Hmm.
You know, I just look at my career in 22 years, how dramatically different kids' lives are from when I started to now. And it definitely is an
Hmm.
adjustment. You have to change your approach. And that these programs are definitely not. But I probably said this before, Mark, on a podcast. I still get frustrated with the fact that we give a first year 22-year-old teacher the same exact course load and teacher schedule as a 30-year veteran. I mean, how many doctors come right out of school and they say, "Oh, go perform that brain surgery on your own"?
Right.
You don't do that.
Hmm.
That's
It takes
very true.
time, and
Right.
you work a very. I mean, does anybody want open heart surgery performed by a doctor that just passed the boards, or do you want somebody that still has some years of experience, working with somebody? And I think
Hmm.
we really need to look at that
Hmm.
because these young kids are just thrown in, and it's so overwhelming, and and you can provide them with all the safety nets and the resources, but it still takes time to learn how to do the
Right.
job.
Well, it sounds a lot like what the article is saying also is about they come out with a lot of that theory work, but not enough maybe of those practical hours of experience in the programs. I mean, a semester or
Hmm.
two of student teaching certainly is not going to be enough to really understand your roles and responsibilities in a classroom. So, it's definitely an interesting point that you're making.
Especially when you have a tremendous variety of how the cooperating teacher actually interacts with the student teacher, and what kind of flexibility they have with them. Some cooperating teachers want the student teacher to use their lessons, and some cooperating teachers want the student teachers to create their own lessons, and some want them to take the reins, and others want them to just sort of co-teach with them, and there's such a variety of experiences that the lack of continuity almost implies that there's a little bit of a Russian roulette aspect to teacher training, where you might catch a good one, or you might catch someone who's poorly trained that you just don't know until you kind of pull the trigger.
Yeah, and let's not forget, it's also very important that people know their content. And how many people, come right out of college and are fully well versed in whatever it is that they're teaching. Because it's very difficult to develop inspiring, motivational, exciting lessons with creative activities and higher level thinking if you don't really know well what you're teaching.
But I'll jump in as the administrator to say, I would rather have the creative, energetic, hardworking individual, and I can help them develop their content, versus the content guru who can't motivate a child to worth a lick. So obviously, ideally, you get both. But I would, if I had my choice, I would always take the former, because the content can come over time, but that magnetism and that enthusiasm, the ability to sort of be the cheerleader in front of the classroom, is something that not everybody has, and that's sort of in my eyes how college professors are differentiated from high school and middle school and elementary school teachers, because they can just sort of stand up there and kind of spew their knowledge, and there isn't necessarily a desire to motivate. They just feel the content is exciting enough, it'll just generate enthusiasm on its own, versus when you're working K-12, you have to generate the enthusiasm in order to excite the students to the point where they want to learn what it is that you want to teach them. And college, I think it's kind of works the opposite way.
Well, Mark, I won't disagree with you, but then I will say that there is the argument that none of these programs really going to make a difference, because the greatest teachers are simply born, and they're going to appear, and there's not really much you can do to create that. And there are people that make that argument.
Well, I hope not, because then that means that nobody, they're either, it's predetermination, and then we can't help a teacher really develop into something special from sort of the embers. And
I think
I don't know, that's a little disheartening to think of.
Right. And
but I've heard the argument.
I definitely think, and if I could jump in for a second, I hear both of you, and you're both making very good points. And I think that what we would
But my points are better, just be honest.
What we would hope from the organization is those great teachers, we don't want them to give up before they realize that they're great. And I think that that's where that training is so important in the college years, for them to have a tool bag and a set of skills that can be developed when they finally get their jobs in the classroom. Because if they don't have that knowledge and that preparation, when it gets tough, and we all know it gets tough,
Absolutely.
We don't want to lose those people out of the profession who might be born teachers, but because of their lack of preparation, just kind of give up. So I think that's
and there's a
real
learning
challenge.
curve. Yeah, absolutely. So my final question for both of you is, if you could be the president or the dictator or the czar of a great teachers college tomorrow, what changes would you institute?
I'll defer to you first, Christina.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's either gentlemanly or cowardly, because you don't have an answer. So I'll have to figure out.
I'm just being polite.
Okay, we'll take you at your word.
Honestly, I think I would love to see college programs mimic what we do for first-year teachers before they're first-year teachers. So give them that opportunity to have a classroom on their own, with mentors that are assigned to them, and with colleagues that are working with them. Because I think a lot of times we're doing that after we've already hired them, and after they may have already experienced some challenges because they weren't prepared enough. So I would really like to see colleges really offer more, I don't want to call it student teaching, because I really would love to see it be more of a mentorship, where they're running their class, they're responsible for it, but they have the dedication of a mentor for them. Instead, in the programs that we're doing right now, I have great teacher mentors, but they still have their own caseloads of 125 students and countless other responsibilities. So I would like to see a better mentorship program in the college level.
Okay. The audience should know that Mark doesn't give us these questions ahead of time. He throws us on the spot here. So, I would ban the use of the word pedagogy, and I would only allow all of the courses to focus on real life applications and experiences that they're going to witness in the classroom. And I would make it as practical as possible. And I do think that knowing the content while you're in college is very important. And by the way, I will admit that I myself did not walk into the class, anywhere near as knowledgeable as I am today. I woke up at 4 o'clock every morning and opened up the 5 textbooks around me, pre-internet age, and tried to learn as much material as I could. But I think I think it would have been a much more comfortable transition. So I would really want to have much more of a combination of the content and the real life approaches about what teachers are going to experience in the classroom.
Absolutely, I would agree.
And I'd love to see an old-fashioned apprenticeship, not quite medieval times, commercial revolution apprenticeship, but something similar where it was a multi-year apprenticeship where you would learn from a master teacher over time, and then you could develop that rapport with that person and see how they handle the life cycle of a school year and maybe 2 school years before you're ready to sort of step out on your own and have your own 125 or 150 students to take care of and try to shepherd through, especially with how crazy everything is and convoluted everything is today. So that's what I'd like to see. But those things obviously are very expensive and requires a tremendous dedication of resources, more than it seems like everyone's willing to spend at this particular time.
Sure.
But anyway, thank you so much, really, very much, both of you, especially Christina, because you added a tremendous amount to our show today, and I think you were incredibly enlightening and very very well prepared, more well prepared than we are, that's for sure, and really gave us a lot to think about. And there are challenges there. I mean, you've basically thrown down the gauntlet to anyone who's listening here to do their part in making their school as bias-free as it can be, not just for genders, but for ethnicities and races and everything else. So it's very important. It's certainly the challenge of the 21st century in our schools to try to create as much equity as we can for everybody. And I think this show and your words went a long way in trying to promote that. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on the show. And, my mission is really just to have the conversation. So thank you for letting me do that.
It's our pleasure.
And I echo all of Mark's statements. I really appreciate you giving up your time. It was very interesting to listen.
Thank you. This was fun. I'd come back anytime.
Well, we'd be happy to have you back.
Oh.
Great.
That was a dangerous thing for her to say. You don't know Mark. He's going to have in your Google Drive in about 10 minutes the next show notes for the show.
I love it. No, really, thank you. This was a lot of fun. So thanks.
You're very welcome. So let me just do a little bit of our end of show business. If you'd like to follow us on the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com. You could also listen to us and subscribe at the iTunes store or in the iTunes store, State of Ed Podcast. Also, if you have a question or you want to suggest a topic, you can email us at ask@stateofedpodcast.com. And you could also follow us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. And of course, I will put on our show notes the piece from the New York Times. We'll also have a little bit of the research from Professor Aronson, Dr. Sapienza's links on gender bias, and the Bechdel test, and cjane.org. We have a lot there. So anyway, thank you both sincerely. This was a great show, and I learned a lot and had a great time. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.